I talk about technology, having sort of fought the fight and lived the life over a number of years. And for those of you who don't know who I am, let me explain just a little bit about my background. I started out life as a physicist, but I was a bad physicist. In every profession, there are good people and bad people. And it's important to remember there's a normal curve, and there are bound to be some bad physicists. Now, good physicists get employed, and bad physicists don't. So a good question would be, what is the logical job course for a bad physicist? In my case, it was absolutely clear. I became a war correspondent. Why not? I could only be a bad war correspondent. So having not succeeded as a physicist, I spent much of the 1970s abroad in many parts of the world: Northern Ireland, Mozambique, Zimbabwe, Central African Empire, Angola, 13 months in Beirut, Lebanon during the Lebanese Civil War. And it was in Lebanon one day, it was the third day of mortar fire on the hotel in which I was living. The second day, the bar ran dry. And you have one of these moments where you sort of look at your life and you think, what am I doing? At the time, I had two job offers. One was to go to Nicaragua and cover the Sandinistas. And the other was to go to Stanford University. Nicaragua, Palo Alto. You know, this decision was tough. No Spanish. Well, no Spanish. But still, I made what seemed to be the logical decision, went to Palo Alto, California, arrived there in the spring of 1977. Because of my nerdy background, I joined the Homebrew Computer Club, which was the world's second personal computer club, met in the auditorium at the Stanford Linear Accelerator Center, and there I met two guys named Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs. And after getting to know them a bit, they offered me a job in their new company called Apple Computer. Now, at the time, Steve Jobs had hair down to here, and he only ate fruit. And Steve said, Steve, who was, I think, 21, said, "We don't have much loot, so we'd like to pay you in stock." I held out for the cash. My mother, like your mothers, has maintained a running tally over the years of exactly how much money I walked away from that day. It's a big number. So I went to work for Apple. In those days, Apple, I was employee number 12. In those days, all the employees were in the same room. Everyone did everything, but nominally what I did was I assembled by hand the first 25 Apple IIs, wrote the manual, and then they fired me because my utility to the company was at an end. So I went back to Stanford. I sort of never really left Stanford, but I went back to Stanford. And then I was brought back to Apple in 1980 to work on a new computer called the Lisa. How many of you remember the Lisa computer? More people knew the Lisa than knew me. For those of you who do not remember the Lisa, it was the first commercial graphical workstation. Prior to that, there had been the Xerox Alto, but that was never sold to anyone. It was just a sort of a technology exercise at Xerox Palo Alto Research Center. But the Lisa was the first real commercial graphical workstation, and it was based primarily on technology stolen from Xerox PARC. And I was a part of the group that was to do the graphical user interface for the Lisa. Now, my only technical claim to fame in my entire career, this is it, this is the only thing I can take credit for in my entire life, is I invented the trash can icon. There's a story here. The trash can icon came to be because of a problem that I had had. When I had been kicked out of Apple, went back to Stanford, I had this summer when I wasn't at Apple and I wasn't at Stanford. What was I going to do? Somewhere in my brain there was this nascent knowledge of physics somewhere. So I became an investigator for the Presidential Commission that investigated the nuclear accident at 3 Mile Island. And I went to 3 Mile Island near Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and spent the summer wearing a dosimeter and going around trying to figure out what the heck had gone wrong with this reactor, running reactor simulations on an old IBM 360 at the NASA had, and it was great fun. It was a heck of a summer. But I also spent time that summer. Every night I would photocopy documents and I would mail them to myself because I was determined that after this was all over, I was going to write a book about it. So when I got back to Stanford, I wrote a book about the nuclear accident at 3 Mile Island. And it was called, cleverly, here's a great title, 3 Mile Island. What do you think of that? Published by Random House, 1980. And I was writing the book on the only word processor that I had, which was an IBM 370-168 mainframe. It was cheap. Someone else maintained it. I didn't pay the power bill. It made sense. But I had to write an entire book in a line editor. That's a lot of lines. You know, think in terms of lines of code. So I was working on my ADM3A terminal with my acoustic coupler running at 300 baud to the mainframe. The middle of one night on my line editor, and there I am, I'm going away, I'm almost done with the book, I'm going, and then I pressed the wrong key. You've had this experience. You press the wrong key, and then there's something that goes through your mind that says, it's not real until I take my finger off the key. As long as I keep my finger on this key, nothing bad can happen. So the finger's on the key, and it just takes a millisecond. You press the key and you know. It's almost like your finger is actually accelerating toward the key and hasn't yet touched it, and you know, and you're trying to slow it down. You're trying to stop the finger before it hits the key, but it hits the key nonetheless, and there you are. At that point, you increase the pressure because you don't want to risk what you fear you've just done. So the finger's on the key, and then you think, who can I call? But you're connected through the phone to the computer, so you can't use the phone. The guy on the other side of the wall, he's a computer scientist, isn't he? I mean, that's what his wife said. What if I knock on the wall? It's 4 a.m. Can he help? So eventually, you take the finger off the key and go downstairs, get on your bicycle, go across campus to the help center, to the help desk. Go up to the help desk guy and say, I pressed the wrong key. Tell me there is a backup tape. And turns out the guy at the help desk is an English major. And he goes into this long story about how Lawrence of Arabia wrote a book called The 7 Pillars of Wisdom. And he wrote it longhand on paper. And he had the manuscript, and he was taking it to his publisher, and he lost it on a train platform in London. And he had to start all over. And I'm thinking,